that will explore familiar themes from fresh or different perspectives. This is our first Tuesday lecture series and is on the Haitian Revolution. And why is it important in world history and the lessons that we can learn from it today? Paul is going to explore and analyze several phases of the revolution, like the fear of this revolution by some of the most powerful forces at the time in the world. And the two questions that won't go away when people talk about this revolution. Who betrayed the Haitian Revolution, and was it a success? We hope to get some interesting insights from our speaker this evening. So without delay, here is Reverend Gerald Thomas, who will introduce Dr. Pauliquet. Thank you.
My name is Gerald Thomas. I'm honored to be here this evening to introduce my colleague in the ministry, Dr. Joseph Pauliquet. Dr. Pauliquet is currently the senior pastor of Brockton Tabernacle Church. He's a poet, writer, and thinker. Dr. Pauliquet was born in Haiti and arrived in Nyack, New York in the early 1980s. In the mid-80s, he moved to Massachusetts, where his undergraduate and graduate education took place, with a focus on business, computer technology, and theology. Writing, however, was something that was very dear to him. Dr. Pauliquet is the author of 3 poetry collections, a short story book, and a novel. He's an author that cannot be ignored, as he captures people's lives through his multiple disciplinary talents as a writer, poet, minister, and counselor. And without a delay, it is my pleasure to present you my colleague in the ministry, Dr. Joseph Pauliquet, on the Haitian Revolutionary series.
As you can see, a map of Haiti in 1700. Thank you for coming out to hear this lecture on the Haitian Revolution. My aim this evening is to get you to explore this topic by keeping an open mind about a misunderstood phenomenon. I hope I can provide a set of new understanding, tools to show the impact of these revolutions on the world. Why were the greatest powers in the world at that time against the island state of Haiti? And why did they fear the Haitian revolutions more than any other revolution? Why did they try to overthrow the black slaves' ambitions for freedom in the world? In order to try to get some understanding, I need to provide a background to these questions of the fear of the black independent nation, the United States, the white Europeans elite, in Latin America, France, obviously Britain, and Spain. Major powers are becoming one at the time. All had positions, attitude, and policies that were against Haiti. Once the revolution started in 1791 to all the way to the eventually victory in 1804. The victory of the Americans and French revolutions were white victories, while the Haitian Revolution was a black victory, which in the 18th century was unthinkable. Nobody believed that the lowest people on the social an economic ladder in the world, the slaves could go to the top of freedom and then self-rulers. Nobody except the black slave themselves. Haiti extended the idea of universal freedom. The Haitian black slave dared to rise up and defeat the greatest military power in the world at that time for freedom for themselves and for the destructions of the proclaimed superiority of the white race as a justification for enslaving the black race. It was unethical, unthinkable, black slaves gaining their freedom through war, so Haiti stood alone. Therefore, she was punished, the ultimate sacrifice in order to introduce a more expensive definition of freedom. American and French revolutions, part of the movement for greater freedom, nevertheless, did not acknowledge certain groups to be inside the real world of freedom. The Haitian Revolution showed how the lowest group had a chance of gaining their collective consciousness and their self-independence, and therefore setting an example for all submerged people, no matter what their color or economic or social status. If slaves could become free, that is a great thing, but great if the slave could gain freedom by their own efforts. And greater still, a black slave freedom in the 1800s. At that time, the world's fear was the fear of a black revolution. A slave revolution. The great French and European general and leader Napoleon sum up well the positions of the world's power on the Haitian slave gaining freedom. In a world at that time where only the rich and well-born were allowed to rule society, allowed to benefit generously. Napoleon sent the largest fleet in French history at that time, over 20,000 troops, to fight the great Haitian general leader Toussaint Louverture and his people, only to try to restore slavery in the newly declared free black Haiti. In Napoleon's heart, he said this was against the first black republic in the New World, was a crusade against the bad black slaves who were supposed to be inferior and not capable of this battle. Victories, to say nothing of war victories. Writing to one of the generals, Napoleon wrote, and I quote, "The safety of the French colonies and of all the European powers in the two Americas, the uprising of the blacks has created a focal point of chaos that could provoke disorders elsewhere in the world." End of quote. A slave power, a black slave power, was the greatest threat in the 1800s to the most powerful nations in the New World because they were reaping the greatest benefits from a slave freedom labor. When the free ride for the French elite, colonial rich, was defeated, the world trembled at the thought of an independent Haiti. I will start the series discussing this fear of slave power. But before I get into the nature and analysis, I am going to try to give you a brief background of a rich Haiti. A petty bourgeoisie, middle and upper middle class Haiti, and a slave black Haiti. I want to provide some facts and interpretations of the islands before the Haiti Revolution exploded in 1791. Before that date, the conditions were growing and wait for the explosions that lasted for 13 long years, but ended with self-assured national pride, a terrible and a beautiful historical legacy, a stirring with the Tainos, and a flag that represented a new definitions of independence, the hard-fought ambitions of freedom that came into existence in 1804. The Haitian Revolution started in the northern province that was probably because the richest and the most numerous plantations were in the north. But the islands didn't start as the richest colony in the New World. Looking at the map here, we see the outline of Haiti in the late 1700s. It was the Spaniard and not the French who claimed the island first through Christopher Columbus in 1492. When Columbus and his crew landed on the north shore of what is present-day Haiti, he promptly took the land for Spain and named it Hispaniola. The French were late comers when they arrived on the islands in the middle of 1600. Soon the island was split in two. The French took the western part of called it Saint-Domingue, and the Spaniard held on the eastern part. Of course, the original people, the one that Columbus and his ship came upon when they landed on the islands, had a different name for the island. Tainos and Arawak people call it Haiti. It's, I'm sorry, not the H, but Ayyiti. Land of high mountains. And I want you all to remember that fact. High mountain, because 2 centuries into the future of Haiti, that fact, high mountains, becomes very important to the African slave when they go to war for their freedom. 1492 until the 1600s, the Spaniard monopolized the islands, but in 1650, the French turned the western part, Saint-Domingue, into a plantation economy. The rush for profits was, and the French built the island of Saint-Domingue into the crown jewels of productions, great riches. They built up a powerful ideology, belief system in white supremacy to justify the fact that of a world of horrible degradations and powerlessness of African slaves that were worked quickly to death to extract profits for France and the Western powers. And Haiti was one of the first sites of murder and violence that the old world forced onto New World, though Columbus described the Tainos in his diary as a peaceful and generous people. He also wrote in the same diary that they also could be easily subject to slavery. And that is exactly what he and the Spaniards did to the Tainos, beside doing a number of other punishments too, like killing them, raping their women, and taking some Tainos back to Spain for sure. Historians say that beside being murdered by human hands, the Tainos died by the thousand from Europe's diseases because they were not immune. It is important to understand the Tainos were not completely passive to the violence and dominations. They did resist, specifically when the 37 crews members that Columbus left behind while he went on to further explorations. The crew members wanted the Tainos women as a slave for domestic and sex work, and that started a war. The Tainos was defeated, and since the Spaniards had guns and they did not, historians estimated that in 1492 the island had several million inhabitants. But after 25 years, the number were reduced to about only 50,000. One last point here. Did I mention that all of this happened because Columbus and the Europeans were looking for new route to China, and yes, search for gold. The Tainos were reduced to slavery tools to look for gold, so therefore Columbus and the Europeans could profit. A priest, ironically enough, some say, started the slave trade because out of sympathy for the numerous death and tragedy of the Native Americans. He recommended that African slaves take their place. The priest saw how aggressive and intense these labor plantations were, and thought the African could do the labor instead of the Native Americans. So profit is an element here, and some will say the main element that created the violence: fear, invisibility, and powerlessness from the very beginning in Haiti's history. The French colony of Saint-Domingue, Haiti. French established a plantations economy in the 1600s. Cash crops, that was the main goal. Sugar relied on slave labor. 2/5 of the world sugar was produced in Saint-Domingue, profitable French colony. I venture to say this famous French proverb because, as you recall, the Spaniards started the tradition of violence against the Native American. And 2 centuries or so later, the French started the tradition of violence against the African. In many ways, we can say that the Africans became the Tainos. And in the end, they recognized that the 50,000 that were left on the island mixed their seeds with the Europeans and Africans. It was Tainos that helped the Africans when they were brought to the islands and later tried to escape. They would find the Tainos in the mountains or other hidden places and built a life there. One of the most important resistance traditions before the revolutions and helpful to the revolutions was the Marons, or Marons towns, fleeing into the high mountain, escaping the brutal experience of being a slave from sun up to sundown. In short, the French were as cruel to the African as the Spaniard were cruel to the Taínos. The violence of the French was really harsh because of the important fact that the majority of the people of the islands were Africans and the minority of French had them as a slave, living and working under the most horrible conditions. And the conditions of the African slave are based all on profits and fear of the French that the Africans were going to do bad things to them. Saint-Domingue, remember, was the name the French gave Haiti at the times and made it the richest colony in the New World. Some of the richest men, families in the world got their riches from labor of African slaves. There were various labor plantations for spice, cocoa, indigo, coconut. The second richest commodity exported was coffee, and the plantations were big and numerous. The biggest money maker, the commodity that made France rich and powerful with a large finance budget, was sugar. Sugar and coffee were two of the most popular products in these islands. Produce about 40% of all the sugar and 60% of all the coffee consumed in Europeans. Saint-Domingue was known as the Pearl of the Antilles because of the hard and never-ending labor of African slaves building great wealth for their slave masters. The island produced more sugar and coffee than all of the British West Indies and generated more profit than all of the 13 colonies that became the United States of America. For the French white elite and then supporters were deeply invested in these profits. Let's end this segment with a presentation of profitable economy year. In this case, 1767, here is what this year reaped for the slave bosses. The year Saint-Domingue was accountable for exporting 72 million pounds of raw sugar and 51 million pounds of refined sugar, 1 million pounds of indigo, and 2 million pounds of cotton. This was one of the richest colonies, not just in the New World, but in the world as a whole. Coming to America, the Atlantic slave trade, 1600 to 1860. As we view this diagram of the millions of Africans that were sent to different parts of North, South, Central, and West Indies, makes you wonder, wonder, what was it like on those ships before you were captured? The coming of Africans to the New World was a science fiction adventure. Imagine being in your home here in Brockton with your husband or wife, a friend, and your children, and some of the great-grandchildren. You hear a knock on the door or the doorbell ring and rush to open the door. Think more family more French. Instead, at the door is a bunch of military troops that come inside your house to capture, kidnap, and take to the land of China forever. Think about that. Imagine if you and your family and friends are taken from everything that is familiar to you and put on an airplane and treated you horribly. Very little food, very little water, naked, no clothes, served and bullied until you get to China. You land in a strange land that is for better or worse is now your home and your future generations' home forever. Look at this map and pause for a moment and see this scenario, the real movie, as the experience of an estimated 10 to 15 million African, completely science fiction, identified as nightmares. As you can see from this diagram, 4.5 million Africans came to West Indies, and historians tell us that over half of them came to the French colony of Saint-Domingue. They face of exploitations and cruelty. Remember that word profit we talked about earlier. Looking at this slide, we see where profit at all costs is where it's reward, its ugly, brutal violence head. We showed how the islands of Haiti was the richest, but there was a big price to pay for that title, the richest, the wealthier colony of slaves. The life expectancy of an African in the Haitian field was 3 to 7 years. Remember that, 3 to 7 years. Shall I repeat that? 3 to 7 years was the life, and these were a strong, able-bodied Africans. The transportation from Africa to the New World was called the Middle Passage. On that trip, many Africans killed themselves to escape their unknown fate, starving themselves, willingly trying to catch a virus or disease on the ship to die, and jumping overboard in the waters. The one that survived got to the New World, and the ones that got to the new islands, the last man, woman, and child left standing can accurately be described as some of the strongest people on the planet. And the French reaped the enormous benefits until that fateful year, 1791. When the revolution started and they redefined universal freedom for the world as homage to those who had died on the slave ship, those who had taken part in the slave and free people of color revolt, and in homage to the Tainos, Arawak, and the original Native Americans murdered, invisible, wiped from the face of the earth, except now renewed by the Africans starting in 1791. Once on these plantations, we want to ask the question, how did they control and get the Africans to work themselves to death? For the French, they had their intact great ideology called white supremacy. That set of an attitude allowed them to develop a belief system in the complete inferiority of the African people, that these people were worthy of slavery because they were inept, lazy, the most ironic charge of all, they could not reason, ignorant, helpless in organizations skills, and most of all, the Africans are cowards, incapable of noble acts. White supremacy allowed the French and the other Europeans to rape African women, create mulatto children, make invisible African men and women because they were less than humans. They were said, the Bible, they even said the Bible and God were on the side of the white supremacists. For the African slave, they had physical weapons and violence, whippings, beheading, cutting of women's breast, and cutting of the genitals of men, tortured, dog, and ants eating humble human flesh. The limitless hunt for profit was all generated, also systematic social control and physical violence, but the slave masters had an ideology that justified the destructions of black bodies. I read to you a passage written by the personal secretary of Henry Christophe, one of the leaders of the revolutions, and later the ruler who was a slave half his life. So I'm going to read that. Have they not hung up men with head downward, drawn them in sacks, crucified them on planks, buried them alive, crushed them in mortars? Have they not forced them to consume feces, and having flogged them with the lash, have they not cast them alive to be devoured by worms, or onto anthills, or lashed them to a stake in the swamp to be devoured by mosquitoes? Have they not thrown them into boiling cauldrons of cane syrup? Have they not put them in men and women inside barrels, studded with spike, and rolled them down mountainsides into the abyss? Have they not considered these miserable blacks to men-eating dogs until the latter, saddled by human flesh, left the men mangled, victim to be finished off with bayonet and poniards? End quote. Forgive me, but our revolutions cannot be understood without giving you this context. The face of cruelty was overwhelming, impressive, and the whole society was complicit in it because they chose profit over ethical and moral decency. White supremacy assured them that Africans and African slaves were not real human beings and therefore were not protected by a human and moral compass. The body and mind and a spirit resist revolt. The Haitian Revolution was neither a sentimental nor a bloodless revolution. I shared with you a moment ago a passage that without sweet sentiment gave us the horrible lives that the slave experienced daily for over 2 centuries. Yet, if you have read many Western accounts of our revolution, guess who? Many times get this sympathy. Not the Haitian slave and patriot, but the French. Doing research, I was amused and angry at the same time when I saw pictures or read articles, books, and summaries that would discuss extensively the bloody revenge of violence by the Haitian slave and patriot, but rarely spell out the horrible physical and psychological warfare the slave went through for generations. The revolution was partly a revenge, reckoning for the Haitian slaves who for centuries suffered thoughtless cruelty and physical and mental control. The important things to remember is that the violence strategies, tactics, and method of that the Haitian slave and revolutionaries used to harm and kill and control the white minorities during the revolutions were pioneered by the French masters themselves and their supporters for over 2 centuries. The first reason for the revolutions then was this suffering, this misery, this permanent hell that had trapped the slaves. Historians sometimes only recognize resistance only if it is big, systematic, but the African Haitian slaves learned many subtle and quiet methods of resistance, like learning all of the effects of the different herbs to poison their masters and their mistresses. And I say masters and mistresses because sometimes the women were the worst in devising punishment for the slaves with a little mercy as the men. For Haitian slaves, the nightmare that started across the Atlantic never ended. Remember, the life expectancy for an able-bodied woman was between 3 to 7 years. When some experts contend that the majority of the slaves did not revolt, is that possible? Many of the slaves came from war cultures in West and Central Africa. And one of the positive that came from the ship in Africans fresh, they were not used to the suffering to the point that they would become immune to it. But even with the slaves that were there a long time, could human beings become so dehumanized that they accept the condition? Could they allow themselves to be so passive so robotic? That's a question for philosophers and psychologists. But here is important things. The slave had their culture, their language. They had a daunting spirit, and equally important, there is a spiritual or religion that told them that they were as good as their masters, and that their spirituality, their religion taught them also that they must fight their way for freedom and independence. It is well known fact that the initial organized system resistance started in the north. That is where the richest plantations were. A religious ceremony evoking the African war gods was in homage to those gods or gods, which would help this slave overthrow their bad masters. At this ceremony, they also pledged loyalty to another. The ceremony was led by a voodoo priest, bookman, but voodoo was only one of the spirit tools that the slave used. Christianity was important too. In Haitian voodoo combined African religion with Christians, and in this case, Roman Catholic religion that had saints that many African slaves identified as gods or a spirit, including the spirit or gods of war. A spiritual religion provides them with dignity and self-assurance that their cause was just, and expose the hypocrisy of the slave masters and the society that supported them. The main revolutionary leader was Toussaint Louverture, proclaimed Roman Catholic faith even though he was aware of voodoo and used it for the revolution, even though he claimed that the Catholic Church as the state religion once the liberations had happened. It's only a matter of time. Saint-Domingue's racial breakdown in the 18th century, 2,000 to 40,000 whites, which was 3% to 7% of the population. 30,000 free people of color, which was about 5%. 15,000 of mulattoes, which was about 2.5%. And 500,000 slaves. That was 88% of the population. These are revolutionary time, 1791 to 1804. The revolt, inspired by American and French revolutions. 500 gens de couleur sent to fight British in the American War of Independence. 1789, white settlers demand self-rules, but with no equality for gens de couleur. 1791 Civil War breaks out. A slave revolutions under voodoo priest named Bookman. French, British, Spanish forces attempt to intervene. French forces dealt major setback by Toussaint and yellow fever in 1798. one event after the other, and the principles. Key event, French Revolution start in 1789, uprising in northern plains, August 1791. Outbreak of war, France versus British, Spain, spring in 1793. Emancipation decrees of August 93 and February 94. Toussaint changes side in spring 1794. British occupation 1793 to 98. Toussaint secret treaty with England 1798 to 1799. War between Toussaint and André Rigaud 1799 to 1800. Toussaint continues an occupation of Saint-Domingue in 1801. War of Independence 1804, 1802 to 1803. Some key individuals with Vincent Auger, Jean-François, Toussaint Louverture, Sotanax, André Rigaud, Moïse, Alexandre Pétion, Henry Christophe, Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Yes. Yes. All right, that's it. Thank you so much.